You're tuned in to the MtG Cabal cast, where they cover Magic, the Gathering finance. All right? You don't know about it? You're tuned in right now and get ready to learn some shit. Buckle your seatbelts and light a blunt and get ready for the MtG Cabal cast. Starring Reptar and Thirsty, them onion head motherfuckers.
Alrighty, guys, welcome to the newest episode of the Cabalcast, and this week we are holding ourselves accountable yet again. We are taking a look back at our Outlaws of Thunder Junction set review, where we did our traditional Goldilocks style review of cards, and we are seeing where they're at with the gift of hindsight. So with that, let's take it away.
Right. So for me, the start was pretty clear cut with Jace Reawakened, and I basically said if this was going to hit anywhere, it would have to be in Standard, where it is a turn for format or slower, because this has the opportunity to work inside the ramp decks. We can look at plotting ramp spells. Maybe, though, that'll put us a bit behind. We have a Troxin, things like that we can plot. And at the end of the day, when you take a look at the card itself, you can basically see that this is really only seeing play in Pioneer, and it's the brave souls that really just enjoy trying to figure out how to sneak Valky into play, and that's it. That's all people are really doing with it, outside of like some EDH people. It's not really hitting there either. It's this kind of mediocre planeswalker in Commander, and outside of that, it's not doing anything yet. I still think it has the opportunity to do something, but from what we're seeing right now, it's just not doing a whole lot. And I do believe that the price point on this basically aligns with that, where it's just like this 5-ish, even less. Last I checked, it was 5. It's now like a $3 or less planeswalker. And if I had to take a guess, this has opportunity to be broken, not necessarily with Valky or to do anything dumb, but the cost to that is that formats have to slow down. So it's not that I don't believe in this card. I don't believe on it enough to speculate on it. I do believe in it enough, though, to own a playset, and it is something that I'm just kind of waiting to move in on. Like, at between $2.75 and $4 a pop, I think it's perfectly fine, and I think the alt art might just cost about the same. So at the end of the day,
about there,
yeah. If you believe in this, then there's no reason not to pick it up. I don't have too hard a time believing that it can do something, but right now Valky just isn't it, and that's kind of the called shot I made, and here we are.
Yeah, I've come around on some things recently, and one of them is the belief that if, and this holds true of anything I've picked, if our need is for a format to slow down, we may have to wait longer than we normally would.
Yeah.
I take a look at MH3, take a look at Nadu. As of day recording, they issued a public statement talking about emergency bannings and stuff. So, like, I don't believe we're going to see a slowdown soon, but I think we have to eventually. Mm-hmm. And I think that Jace especially is one of those cards that when formats slow down, people are going to try it first, because it is a good card advantage engine. It's very good. The problem is they're usually dead before they cast it. But once we see that slowdown, I think this happens, and I think this definitely has a home long term in like Battlecruiser EDH for sure.
Yeah.
I believe in that card as well. I have an EDH playset, so the extra one just in case. Mm-hmm. I think Planeswalkers are something that if you can get them for especially now around $3, to me it's worth having 4 or 5 because it may pop someday.
Yeah, and it's also got the plot mechanic, so it's kind of difficult to imagine getting a reprint anywhere. When you look at the Planeswalkers they're choosing to basically anamorph, you are seeing a lot of these generically powerful Planeswalkers. Like, we just saw Tomio Field Researcher leaked. We saw Jace the Mind Sculptor. And it's these agnostic Planeswalkers that just do some really cool, interesting things, but are fairly agnostic. They're not attached to a plane specifically or a set of mechanics overall. They just kind of do their thing. And with plot being so specific to OTJ, that also is kind of a knock against the reprint. So it is safe for a little bit in that regard too, but for you, you're overhyped.
My overhyped was the spree mechanic in general. Mm-hmm. I still stand by what I said, which is that it's bad. It's just it's a non-existent spell that you have to pay extra to get an effect. I still stand by that. The example I gave was Final Showdown, which was, I believe, around $12 to $13 at the time of the OTJ episode. It is now down to about 6 or 7, but it has taken off in CEDH. And I should have given the caveat to the spree mechanic that the one place that it may see play is 100-card singleton formats in general. Final Showdown is great because it's both protection on your combo turn as well as removal on your combo turn, because being able to shut down Grand Abolisher or something like that to go off is pretty good. Anything like that. But I digress. I still think this format is bad design.
Yeah.
I don't think it's something we're ever going to revisit again. And I don't understand why we had to do this in the first place, unless we're admitting that we're out of ideas. Because frankly, paying 6 mana for Destroy All Creatures is bad. It's the other 2 methods that work. Mm-hmm. Unfortunately, that is not true of most spree spells. Most of the spree spells have one mode that you want to use ever. Everything else is bad. I do think, though, that the cards that do hit with a spree mechanic in EDH are very much worth going after, Final Showdown included, because this isn't the type of thing that I could see them revisiting, because it hasn't been widely adopted across multiple formats. So I don't think they have a leg to stand on if they want to say it's popular, because frankly, it's just not.
Okay.
So I still stand, though, that generally overhyped at the time it came out. Now you can see nobody's talking about it. There's no murmuring about powerful spree cards making splashes in formats. It's just like, whatever.
Yeah.
So
I think that's fine. The only other, so when the set releases, I saw Final Showdown and I thought it was a decent look overall. Everybody was stuck on Insatiable Avarice. That is the like Grim Tutor.
Yeah.
And it's just sorcery speed, and it puts, for a black and 2, puts a card on top of your library, or for triple black, target player draws 3 cards and loses 3 life, all at sorcery speed. Like, that's cool. Yeah. It's interesting. One Last Job is really weird. It's basically a white reanimation spell that just does a whole lot of nothing.
Yep.
You can return a creature, a mount or vehicle, or aura, or equipment, but it starts with a base cost of 3 just to access the spell, which is insane.
Yeah, that's nuts.
Yeah, 3 Steps Ahead is the only card that's currently seeing constructed play. We saw it all over that Pro Tour. It ran roughshod over it. Like, that's probably hands down the best one for constructed. And then there's Smuggler's Surprise, which is like a weird card somewhere between Tooth and Nail and Summoner's Trap. So it costs 1 green, and then there's 2 blue mill 4 cards. You may put up to 2 creature cards or land cards from among the milled cards into your hand. 4 and a green, you may put up to 2 creature cards from your hand onto the battlefield, or 1 green, creatures you control with power 4 or greater gain hexproof. So basically, you just put the creature, like, you draw into the creatures effectively, then you pay 4 and double green, and you put 2 creature cards from your hand onto the battlefield. And so that's like the front half of Tooth and Nail, so to speak. And that,
it's veneer and nail, basically.
Yep, and that's it. Like, the spree mechanic is a weird way to implement kicker, because the cost in the top right just gives you access to a card with a timing and the word spree on it, and then after that you just have to spew off multi-kickers, and it is not the most elegant way to do that. It is fairly confusing. And if these cards were built differently, so they did at least something when you paid the cost in the top right-hand corner, we'd probably see them more than we do. So I am in agreement that, like, I think Spree itself was overhyped.
It reminds me of the bad cycling cycle from Onslaught with, like, Renewed Faith and all that, where it was you cycle it and get a reduced version of the spell.
Oh, yeah.
That's it makes me think they're trying for something like that, but they just don't know how to do it.
Yeah, where Renewed Faith was the only one that was worth, the non-creature cycling spells that was worthwhile. Yeah, for sure. For me, moving into underhyped, that was Cabal, Profiteering, Mare. This was the card we looked at in the 99. Looking at this card in the 99 doesn't quite make sense as a commander. We saw it just outside of the top 20 in the set for cards within the set. And basically it was just a card that was just to lean into I believe the Aristocrat strategy. Let me just bring this up again. So the token strategy, right? So you just kind of block the token strategy because you make your own. and you basically get to drain and gain. So it kind of is its own weird version of the aristocrat strategy of almost the antithesis of what Selesnya wants to do with tokens. You just get to ding him instead. And I said I thought this would be an interesting block to that strategy, kind of an interesting counterplay. And this card is sitting not quite where we expected. It is in the top 10. 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. It's actually in the top 7 from cards within OTJ that exist in the 99, which is where I said we expected this. And I'm kind of impressed it really is that high, to be honest. It's behind Lava Spur Boots, Insatiable, Avarice, Bristly Bill. Those all make sense. Then Annie joins up as ahead of it, which seems a little weird, and Final Showdown is not too far down. I thought Cabal would sit outside the top 10. Sorry, at the bottom of the top 10. I did not think it would climb up this high, but when we were looking at it originally, it was outside the top 20. So we've definitely seen it make a move. I'm just surprised it's kind of moved this high, to be honest. So this was just another kind of interesting look. I haven't taken a look at the decks that have begun implementing Cabal, but if I had to guess, we're going to see them be kind of disparate because it's just an Orzhov card, and those are a little weird to begin with. And when you start to take a look into a strategy, it doesn't always have to play inside the Orzhov strategy because you don't know what's happening at everybody's table. Yeah. And I think that's what Cabal lends itself to do more often than not. It doesn't say build around me. It just kind of says play me. And so I think what we're missing out is that we don't know what's going on at everybody's table. We see like Teysa Opulent Oligarch, cool. We see Marnius Kalgar, sure. Shadrex Silverquill. When was the last time you heard anybody playing that as a commander? Like Mr. House, President CEO, which is just a dice rolling factory. Like it doesn't need to play Cabal, but it does. So this is probably, like I said, an interesting counterplay to a lot of tables.
Yeah, this was the one that of all of our 6 I thought would be the most likely to hit because it played with so many casual EDH play styles, strategies, themes. Hate that still. And I thought that was really, of any of the recent sets we've had, Outlaws of Thunder Junction was the one that spoke most, I feel like, to everyone's inner Timmy of just like wanting to do like cool things with cowboys and heists and stuff, and that plays really well into EDH. Yeah. So I saw this as being, of everything, the one that was most likely to hit and hit big, with also the chance to see play in some 60-card formats if we get back to an aristocrat-style game plan.
For sure.
But yeah, I thought that one was the one that was also the most underhyped of anything in the set almost. My too low, as some of you may remember, and I'm not going to repeat myself too much later, I picked none other than Broko the Ringleader. Now, he is a little bit worse than the last time we saw him, obviously, but it is a card that I just thought thematically was a good pick. I thought it was good for casual EDH players. I still think it is. I think it does basically everything you want in those colors, all of which I said in the last episode. It makes itself a dude. It makes more tokens. It makes a dude, and it lets you draw a card, and if you committed a crime, which in Simic you're probably going to, you draw. Yeah. It does everything you want to do in casual EDH at 4 mana. And it's just a good value. I still stand by that. I don't think it's something that's ever going to catch on in a 60-card format. I think it is plane specific, so we've got a low reprint risk, but, whatever. I don't want to repeat myself, sorry. But I thought it was really good, and I still do. Yeah. I am, 10 2 EDH playsets committed on this card because it was dirt when I said that originally, and it's dirt still. This is something that I love. Just read it. It's great. Yeah. Not much else to it. That's really it. Just reading the card explains it, and it ticks a lot of your really good boxes. It hasn't taken off yet, but I think outside of, and you may disagree, outside of maybe the top 5 EDH cards in every set, adoption has been much slower to the format for the last 2 years because of how frequent releases are.
We've seen a lot of cards not shift in adoption like we expected them to, unless they were, like, to quote Randy Savage, we're seeing the cream rise to the top.
Yeah.
Right? When we looked at Forensic Gadgeteer, and we were looking at that card, it was intermixed with a bunch of the lands, and it stayed where it was in terms of popularity in like this 3-month period that we gave it time for analysis. And in that interim period, cards that were above it that weren't the Surveil lands dropped well below it, and the other Surveil lands like all ticked up above it. Exactly. Yeah. So it was obviously in the top percentage of cards, but its adoption was slower than
we've seen in the past with less frequent releases.
Yeah. Oko, I think, suffers from a different problem. It's not just that, but the more I look at this card, the more I think what might turn people off is that its passive is a clone, which is fantastic. You get to clone a creature when you move to combat, but the problem is you can't tutor it in Simic like you can all your other big creatures or your clones.
Yeah.
So I think people might just have a problem trying to figure out how to play this properly. And with only, is it a Arena Rector that can tutor Planeswalkers? It's like Academy Rector.
That's the only one, I think.
I think that might be too much.
Call the Gatewatch.
Okay, yeah. That might be too much of a hurdle for some people to want to adopt this into their Simic clone decks. Because I look at this, and in the deck that I was running, I would play this in a heartbeat because it helps me churn through my deck. It helps me.
Yeah.
It helps me find my ramp spells so I can cast my Progenitor Mimic, my World Spine Worm, all my high-end threats. And then it's also a threat that really can't be interacted with until... And even when I enter combat, because it's got hexproof.
Yep.
Really, the only way you can interact with it is to come after the Planeswalker part on not my turn. And so for me, when I look at it like that, objectively, it's pretty decent overall in that deck. It only costs 4, like you said, which is probably the mean average for most clones at the end of the day. And the other things it does is really good for the strategy. It defends itself, not well, but it still defends itself. And you have a rummage. Committing a crime, like you said, is not that difficult in Simic. And so what is the blocker here to play? And I think it's just trying to shoehorn the clone into a deck where it makes sense. And I think once we can get past that hurdle, that's when adoption picks up on this card. But for me, that's the only hurdle I see to this card. Otherwise, I don't know why people wouldn't be playing it. Like, it is just a generic blue Planeswalker after that part. Like, cool, that's perfectly fine. Like, people still play Jace Beleren. Like, party Jace. Everybody draws one, I draw one. Everybody draws one, I draw one. Nobody's going to argue at that point. You're just rummaging, or just 2 and 2 if you're not committing crimes, right? It's a perfectly serviceable Planeswalker at the end of the day, and I think if people can figure that part out, or figure out that, like, this is not a bad clone, maybe we should be playing it, then I think we see adoption on it. But I think that little rub of Planeswalker type and wanting to clone a creature is a little difficult for people to get past. Just like another good example of this is is it Volrath Shapeshifter that clones from the graveyard?
Yes.
Right, and Body.
That's the what was it? Cephalid Breakfast used that one.
Yeah.
Or
no, Full English Breakfast.
Yeah, full
because
English,
you clone Phage from your graveyard.
Yep.
Or Dreadnought.
Yeah.
And I think Body Double is kind of the same thing, where they're like very difficult to work with if you're not going to be comboing out in some way, shape, or form. So there's just this value proposition that people either can't get past or can't figure out with cards like that. And I think Oko fits into that. So again, not a bad card. I just think people haven't figured out how to utilize it properly yet.
Yeah.
And then for me, looking at the last pick that I have for it is Just Right on Tiny Bones. And when we took a look at Tiny Bones, I said this seems best as a commander, and as such, it looks like it's already in the correct spot in the top 10 from the set, because this card isn't that offensive as a commander. You're not really dinging people for cards from hand like the previous Tiny Bones. You're just recasting spells from their graveyard. And I honestly don't think that Tiny Bones has kept up. It's just kind of fallen out of top 10. It's now outside. It's almost on the way down to top 15. It is just, I think, a bridge too far for people to cross. It costs 1, which I thought was going to be a huge boon, and so you could just cast it again and again and again with the way mono black works. But people seem to like Gisa the Hellraiser a little bit more instead. They even like Cabal more as a commander. Obeka, Splitter of Seconds, is doing better. There's an incredible amount of commanders that involve a black pip that are doing so much better than Tiny Bones, and I really did not expect it to fall off this hard and still maintain a price tag. Like, it was $30+ I think when we did that episode, and it held that for a while, and it tumbled all the way down to 13. So I took a swing and a miss on that one, and that, that's fine. Like, Xiao Dun also fell out of favor in Commander, and all that does is Demonic Tutor out of your graveyard. There are a handful of other ways to be doing that. It's not that offensive. It's 1 and double black for a 2/2 that Demonic Tutors from your graveyard. Whoop-de-poop. Tiny Bones lets you cast ramp spells on turns 2 and turn 3, which is really big for mono black. Don't get me wrong, but this isn't a commander that's going to like punish people. Like I said, the other ones. This isn't like Necrogen Mists on 1. You're not taxing people out of the game. You're just asking them if you can politely cast their Cultivates or their not their Ancestral Visions,
Time Stretch, or
sure, cast their broken spells basically.
Like.
People are okay with Praetor's Grasp, and that's a Demonic Tutor for your opponent's deck. Like, why not Tiny Bones? Why not Zoidberg? But like, and that's just one I can't complain. And it's not like it has just barely fallen out. Tiny Bones is the commander of 1,200 decks, and it is, like I said, in 14th place. In second place is the Gitrog Ravenous Ride with 3,000 decks. In first place, I already mentioned, is Obeka, Splitter of Seconds, with 7,000 decks to its name. Now, granted, that card can slot in over a lot of already existing commanders in like the multiple upkeeps deck, so it's a little difficult to compare. But just looking at the Gitrog, like, come on, that's almost 3 times as many decks, 2.75. That's a big gap that I really did not expect.
Yeah, this is one that I also expected to take off, and I know that I personally hate cards like this because it relies on my opponents playing good cards, and I assume if they're playing Magic, they're terrible.
Like we all are.
But this actually is balanced. It's good evasion. It reminded me of back when the format was in its infancy and everyone had an Isamaru equip deck. But we're mono black, so we can do insanely broken things with it instead, which I thought would make it better. And I still actually do think that long term, this may be a $20 to $30 card one day. It is obviously going to be almost entirely dependent upon EDH adoption, because it's not like this is Ragavan.
Yeah.
So I doubt it will see much play in 60-card formats. But this was one that I was really surprised did not hold up the price that it had. And it was one that I know we both expected to dip at release, obviously, but not like this.
Not like this, no.
And it was surprising, which again, card evaluation is one of the reasons we try to hold ourselves accountable, because sometimes people don't, and we need to. Yeah. All right, my just right was Vraska the Silencer. So when we recorded, I believe this was in the $3 to $4 range. It's a little bit below that now, but it's 3 mana for a 3/3 Death Touch, which is already fine. Whenever a non-token creature an opponent controls dies, you may pay 1 colorless. If you do, return it to the battlefield tapped and under your control. It's a treasure artifact that has treasure and loses all other card types. This is a card that I thought we would see some strange, basically adoption in EDH, like weird reanimator shells, stuff like that. It was just enough weirdness with also a kind of disruption to it, because it does let you prevent your opponent from regaining their pieces if you want to do that. I still think this card is fine. I think long term it's solid. I also believe when I said it, I expected it to be about a year before it saw any increase, if any. So we haven't really seen any increase yet. We also haven't seen too terribly much adoption anywhere.
Yeah.
Which is incredibly strange. I think it's in 1,000 decks or something like that on EDH Rec.
Yep, it is the commander of 1,054 decks, but in the 99, it's in 4,200 decks, so it's got that going for it.
Yeah, which is like, it's fine. It's not insane, but it's fine. And I would expect that if this sees adoption, then it'll see some appreciation. But I think that this is one that, like, this to me, as someone who has played a lot of black-green or junk with white, this is fine. This card is fine. I would rather have Pernicious Deed at the price point over this.
Yeah.
But this is fine as a threat. And I think that this is, that's why it was fine in price point. We're still sitting at that $3 to $4 range. And I expect that is what it will be forever. I don't expect this to eventually see a gradual step up. I just think it sits where it sits, and that's it.
Yeah. I'm looking at the decks it's in on Rec, and like it is pretty clearly themed into whatever commander it's being played in.
Yeah.
So Glissa at first I thought it was literally Death Touch Tribal. That was all the commanders because they all have Death Touch, and I'm not kidding about this. Like
that's our thing.
It's like Glissa the Trader, First Strike and Death Touch. Like, all right, cool, but then. Glissa, it works similarly to Vraska. Whenever a creature an opponent controls is put into a graveyard from the battlefield, you may return that target artifact card from your graveyard to your hand. So you get this weird thing of when their creature dies, you get an artifact back from your graveyard. But then Vraska also allows you to just steal that creature. Then you have Korvold, which cares about sacrificing treasures. And that's the kind of thing you kind of see when you dig in a little bit. It's not just like tribal Death Touch, which is really funny. It has more to do with like actually being legit Golgari. Savra, Queen of the Golgari, wants you to be sacrificing like black creatures and green creatures, and I assume if I look into that deck, there's a way to color shift the board. I'd hope. Yeah. And that would allow Vraska to work.
Conspiracy, I believe. Yeah.
I think that's creature types.
Oh, that is creature types. You're right. Yeah.
You need to. So Vraska works really well with Savra when you're stealing green and black creatures or a painter. You could just with Painter Servant, you just paint the board, right? There you go. So it works really well with Savra and things like that. And that's what we're kind of seeing is when you dig into Vraska, it does instead of being tribal Death Touch, it is really just like tribal Golgari, and you just want to be doing Golgari things, and people extend out. I mentioned Korvold is Jund. You have other things that don't quite play into that sacrificing theme, like Miracle is like doesn't quite play into that, but it does have this weird thing whenever another non-token creature you control dies, Vraska makes a treasure token, so those two don't play together, kind of thing. That's junk. And then you have Gonti, Canny Acquisitor in Sultai. And like all these weird like pseudo synergies that are just really Golgari decks masking as something else. It's like the Scooby-Doo villains. You just take off the bag over you.
If it wasn't for those meddling kids, it would have been Vraska all along.
Yeah. And so this is the kind of thing where like Golgari players are Golgari players are Golgari players, and Vraska is a very Golgari card. And so to your point, I believe that 100%. It will just float. It's just going to float. It's going to be a good card. It's good at what it does, and it will just kind of fit in. It's already seeing adoption with commanders from the Assassin's Creed card set, or being put into, or being paired with some of those cards, like Aveline and Ezio. Like, it's already... Sure, Cleopatra, you got it. People are adopting this card, and it's not gonna jump up, but it will float. Before I make an it joke, anything else you want to talk about before we cut over to picks?
Nope, let's do it.
All right. So this week I am looking at Court of Ambition from Commander Legends, and I've looked at some of the other courts already. This is the black one. 2 double black for an enchantment. When it enters the battlefield, you become the monarch. Cool, so we instantiate the monarchy. At the beginning of your upkeep, each opponent loses 3 life unless they discard a card. If you're the Monarch, instead, each opponent loses 6 life unless they discard 2 cards. So up top immediately, we're looking at a card that's basically in a grouping that I don't like, which I term Punisher cards. It just punishes your opponents for sitting at the table. That's
Good.
it. Straight up. When I started taking my notes last week, CK was buying 63 at $3.50. This afternoon, when I checked back on CK, they were buying 53 at $3.50. And by end of day, when they updated their buy list after hours, they're now buying 50 at $3. So they understand their player profile, and they know they can start dropping the price on this, because those extra 50 are going to be $3, $2.50, $2, and then don't even bother sending in anymore. They're not going to churn quickly enough for CK to need to raise the buy price.
Yeah.
There are 285 listings on TCG Player right now with a market price of $4.34, which is just about where things were when I was taking my notes. And if you zoom in on the stocks graph, we get this kind of like downward trend in average, but we're seeing an uptick in market after this like dump a week or so ago. And when I added this to my notes back in April, CK was buying 152 at $1.15, and TCG had 140 at $1.09. So we've definitely seen this card go up in price overall in both locations, and now we're just kind of seeing it come back down to reality. When we look at this card in the Commander format, it's exactly what it said. It's a Punisher card. You just put him in the squeeze. That's it. That's all this card is here for. So up top, this looks like a Punisher card, and it really is, but it's not as narrow as things like Necrogen Mists, which look to create a zero fun game. These decks...
The best.
Yeah. Decks that involve cards like that can be referred to oftentimes as group slug decks. It's a term I honestly love because it espouses a different kind of gameplay than Court of Ambition can create. When you're trying to group slug, you just want to slow the game down. You don't even need to tax people out of the game like you would with Thalia. You just want the game to turn to mud. Absolute mud. Nobody can move. You're all just stuck. Court of Ambition doesn't really do that. Can it turn a game into a literal slugfest? Yes, it can, but it also functions as a win con, albeit a slow one, even with the Monarchy. So it does actually provide a light at the end of the tunnel for everyone involved. So the reason I do like this as a pick, and what I think might attract players to the card and others like it as a Punisher card, is the ability to close out a game as well as having layers of synergy, much like an Onion and an Ogre. So again, it creates the Monarchy, so that means it encourages combat, which speeds up games. Period. Ended. The moment the Monarchy is created, people just start slamming creatures sideways into combat to draw that extra card. It is fantastic. But given no reason to turn creatures sideways, it seems a lot of games just drag on endlessly as players durdle around. They just want to play their cards. So this really is a palatable way to end games, just entering combat. Cool. And of course, this plays well in decks that do want to squeeze players out of the game, and it's a great tool in that kit. If you can keep the Monarchy, that's even better. And it just piles on layers of misery as you do. You can curve out discard effects and things like Waste Not to keep players light on the ability to play overall while accruing your own resource wealth. And this is certainly a way to win that is certainly a way to lose games and seats at play groups when you just slug them out. If you want to be synergistic, and this is mainly why I think a lot of players like this card, you can do things with Obeka, Splitter of Seconds, which gives you multiple upkeeps. So now you're triggering this 2, 3, 4 times in a turn. Davros Dalek Commander creates additional tokens. Let me get the exact text on this one because it's weird. At the beginning of your end step, create a 3/3 black Dalek artifact creature token with menace if an opponent lost 3 or more life this turn. Conveniently, Court dings people for 3. Then each opponent who lost 3 or more life this turn faces a villainous choice. You draw a card or that player discards a card. Cool. And then you have the Raven Man as well. At the beginning of each end step, if a player discarded a card this turn, create a 1/1 black bird creature token with flying, and this creature can't block. So cool, you're just spewing tokens with these kinds of commanders. They're synergistic. There are a lot of ways that can turn this card into a non-slug deck when you design from the top down, either around the commander or this card in particular. And I believe it's this ability to be a powerful card in a deck built around punishing or taxing the table, or a utility piece in a deck built around synergies that make it that make this desirable for different player profiles. And then the timeline on this is kind of interesting. So we're selling Court of Ambition. We're seeing it sell about 10 copies a day between your mint and LP. If you buy into the lowest hanging fruit, you can repost them immediately for a small profit. Within a few weeks, the sells for close to $7, so you can almost 1.5x pretty easily and quickly if you just buy and reload at 7+. The drop in price that we saw heading into MH3 is a bit difficult to suss out unless those people holding copies decided to exit their position ahead of MH3 thinking they'd see a reprint. But we can feel confident in scooping these up because we're seeing it kind of come back, and we obviously did not get a reprint on these, and that's something I'm going to touch on later on in the reprint equity section. Then as far as vendor timelines are concerned, there is a bit of traction, but unless their copies sell through, there's a fair chance that the most recent reload can sustain and prices will drop, which is exactly what we saw in CK today. They're starting to reload, their prices are dropping, and their players are not churning through, are not buying enough to have them need to re-up their copies. I wouldn't mind checking in on price in 2 or 3 months to move extra copies, though, because it seems like they will sell in time. So if CK does buy like 60 plus copies like they want, it will sell in a few months. But they're not going to sit here and reload at $3 if the market price is $7. It's just not going to happen. That gap's going to have to close. So if we're buying in now and they need to reload at $4 plus, then we can move to CK. Reprint equity. The Monarch mechanic continues to be used. It hasn't been superseded by initiative, but it seems WotC is more interested in riffing on the court cycle, and they riffed on it in the Wilds of Ixalan, whatever that set was, Commander product, instead of reprinting. They printed 5 new courts in that cycle instead of upcycling. So
it's the new ley line.
Yep, that's exact. I expect the courts to be handled like the ley line cycles, where it eventually becomes a mix and match proposition until WotC finds the versions they like. Because from the original ley line cycle in Dissension, they kept
Void.
Yep, and Anticipation.
Yep.
Those are, and the Void got reprinted, I think, 3 times. Anticipation got reprinted twice, at least. And Anticipation was the last blue one to be printed. Yep. And the green one was poop. I can't even remember what the blue one does. And it doesn't matter what the other white one does because it's not Leyline of Sanctity.
Exactly.
So in essence, they kind of crack that nut there, and they have the 4 or 5 ley lines that they like. And so those are the ley lines that are going to be printed. Now they went back to the well in the courts. They printed 5 new ones, and so they have 10 to pick from, 2 in each color, for the next time they want to do this cycle. Instead of riffing on it, they can mix and match. Will Court of Ambition be the reprint? Will the Wilds one be the reprint? Will we get another one because they don't like the effect? We don't know yet, but we have a direct comparison to make here. And then they're going to make a 5-color one, and it's going to be the most broken thing we can think of because it'll be legal and legacy. So there we go. By quantity overall, I think I have 2 Court of Ambition that I've picked up because either I felt like it or they were in collection buys. I can't remember which. I bought the blue court because it was played in Legacy. Yeah. I bought the green court because it ramps, and I opened a few while I was drafting the set. And I don't think the black one hit in Legacy either, but I'm pretty sure I've picked some up here and there because they were just worth nothing for a really long time, so I just sat on them. I just literally didn't go to my supplemental box to count. But I have a handful, and I wouldn't mind picking up a bunch more. Like, I'm honestly eyeing them now because I think they're good in, like, the Kresh deck that I have gets updated ever so infrequently. Commander Legends is old enough now where I could probably put this card in there, and then it just Juns all day. That's what the deck does. It's just Kresh Jund.
Cool, does it Jund?
Cool Jund card.
It Junds.
Yeah. So for me, I'm looking at Court of Ambition.
Yeah, I love that card. I've loved the court cycle. I thought it was going to be the new Leyline cycle, just geared for Commander, obviously. I have a playset of them myself because on cycles like this where I'm like, hey, I can't tell you which one's going to take off, but one of them is. I try to keep a playset. Plus, when they came out, all those courts were like $3-4.
Yep.
So I was like, you know what? Buy them park them in the box and forget about them. I am going back to about 10 minutes ago and picking Oko the Ringleader. I still believe in this card.
Yeah.
I still think this card does casual EDH things very well. I think it ultimates the turn it comes into play if you have a doubling season. This is something that is plane specific because he's a ringleader. We got a special art treatment for this card, 2 of them actually, I think. Also, it deals with committing a crime, which is kind of unique to Outlaws. And I don't see it getting reprinted anytime soon, but this is, again, one of those cards that we're going to sit on for a long time.
Yeah.
We're sitting at about $1 now. I have, I think, 3 play sets, so 12, because they were $1. And I'm expecting, honestly, based on some of the other Planeswalkers we've seen from recent sets and the amount of time it's taken them to see EDH adoption, we're looking at over a year on this one. So this is still a little bit more long-term. But it is a low-cost investment that you can make, park in a box for a year, and then re-examine. Or forget about it, or whatever, because you haven't sunk that much money into it. But I think that as we see more and more people move from the purely casual and visible EDH crowd, like you're just absolute cards on a table, no sleeves guys. As those players move more and more into not necessarily competitive formats, but into higher power formats, that's when you'll start to see this get the adoption you were talking about from the clone crowd. Because now we're getting the clone effect, but we're trying to clone things that have big, impactful results. You know, if this could clone Primetime, for example, with hexproof, that's insane.
Yeah.
Granted, Primetime's banned, but whatever. That's the kind of thing that I think you'll start to see when that happens. That's when you'll start to see Oko take off more and more, because it's just a good value engine over everything else. It's still 4 mana for 3 loyalty, which is fine. It's still +1s to draw you cards, which is great. It still does all the things you want from a green and blue Planeswalker. It is Simic Incarnate. And for that reason, I think it's a really good value long-term, because it appeals to such a broad line of players that as we pick up more and more on casual to more competitive EDH or higher power EDH, you start to see this adoption. And I think that's what can really lead to this card being good. And I believe it in enough at, $2 a pop that I'm willing to choose it as a pick.
Yeah. No, I think it's good overall. Like I said, I think there's an amount of puzzle that needs to be solved here, and people have started in on it. When you look at the EDH rec page on it, there's just like a smattering of Simic based soup here that is either cloning things or populating or proliferating, and it all works.
Get it? Yeah. Proliferate.
And it all works with Oko, the ringleader. Some of it's not fantastic, some of it is. Some of it just requires a lot of setup, but there's still a lot of grist for the mill on this one. And I think there's very much the opportunity for people to start working in this. And the fact that it is still a Planeswalker, it returns to Planeswalker state, is really interesting because it offers you the clone in combat. So if the original dies, you could still clone the creature. I think becomes a copy of it. Yeah, you would clone Oko, I believe. Keep Oko becomes a copy. Yeah, it should copy all qualities. So if you copy Oko in that state, I believe you get a copy of the creature. Or if you populate it, I think you would get the same. You would get a copy of it.
Yeah.
But you can weave that creature, then like clone that in the second main after the original was killed. Again, I believe. And that offers possibility that people might not be weighing in on yet because they're just focused on what they're doing with their decks as is and aren't seeing that kind of tool in Oko. So overall, I like the card, and for a couple bucks, it seems perfectly fine. Like, it does a lot of powerful Simic kind of things, so why the heck not?
It's the kind of card that I see as you look at it in a vacuum and you're like, that's probably pretty good. And then you actually play it and see the kind of situations come up like you're talking about, where post-combat, clone, whatever. Okay, this is really cool, and this has a lot more play to it than I thought it did before. And I think that's one of the things that's missing from this card, is if we start to see that happen, maybe then we see it take it off more.
Yep. Yeah, so I like the look at Oko. It's kind of weird talking about him as if we have to like aggrandize Oko, but this is the third Oko Planeswalker. People have to remember that too. And the second one came out of the play decks, and that is
it was so bad.
So bad. Poopy.
So bad.
So sorry, I'm just reading the Oko rules text on the copy.
Oh, you're good.
Yeah, well, Oko is a copy of creature. He's in a planeswalker. Cool. He won of his loyalty abilities. Yeah, cool. Each of the tokens created. Yeah, so if you copy a creature, you can then clone Oko, and then you get the creature. The token that's created copies of one character. The token is stated, and the effect is created. The copy permanent is copying something else, and the token is divided flows, whatever. Yep, cool. So you can copy Oko after it's a creature. So you have this kind of bridge state inside combat where Oko gets hexproof, and as long as they don't remove the creature in regards to the trigger, combat. Yeah, it targets. So as long as they don't remove the target, you're still good. And they can deal with it in combat, remove it via the combat step, basically with damage, and then you can just reclone Oko outside combat and come back with that creature again. Cool, nifty, right? So all in all, I think Oko does a lot of tricky things again, surprisingly. So I think it's also for that reason as well. I like it as a look. So I'm behind you on this one. Anything else for this week before we cut out?
Nope.
All right. So for at MtG Cabalcast on Twitter, Facebook, Patreon, and YouTube, I am at HaltDianReptar. You are
at Damon_Thurston.
We'll see you next week.